The Sistine Chapel ceiling is probably one of the most important commissions of the High Renaissance. Now, the Sistine Chapel ceiling, as we see it today, depicts the creation, fall, and redemption of humanity in over 300 figures, mostly nude. The crown of the vault depicts panels of the creation, from the division of the light and dark to the drunkenness of Noah. And here you see a basic map of what each of these images really is. And we'll see throughout Hebrew prophets mixed with pagan sibyls. Pagan sibyls are those who foretold the coming of Christ, but they weren't Christian. We also see this sort of sense of architectural trompe-l'oeil. After all, this is what the ceiling originally looked like. This is architecturally what the ceiling is. It's a shallow dome. When Michelangelo would have come in, it would have been covered in sort of a dark blue with gold stars, maybe some medallions of major saints, but that would be about it. So everything that you see here architecturally is going to be trompe-l'oeil. In other words, all of those pillars, all of the sculptures, all of the plasterwork is painted in such a way to make it look realistic. Overall themes include the early history of Christianity, good versus evil, old wisdom versus youthful vigor. We also see, interestingly, a lot of flat backgrounds, and they lack any perspective. This is unusual. I mean, after all, we've seen Leonardo put a lot of detail into his backgrounds. Raphael, the same thing. Michelangelo, this is like a grade schooler drawing a scene. They spend all of their time in the foreground, and then they simply have a blue sky and green grass, which is, well, exactly what Michelangelo does. But he's doing it for a reason. He's focused solely on the figures and the narrative. He's not interested in anything that will take away from that. So here we see the expulsion of Adam and Eve from the Garden of Eden. We get the story. Anything he put in the background would have simply taken away from the human drama. Remember, Michelangelo is about the drama and emotion of the scenes, and we get a lot of that as we see just this image of original sin and the expulsion. But of course, you can't deal with the Sistine Chapel ceiling without dealing with the most famous painting in it, the creation of Adam. Now, this is not a traditional representation. Rather, it's a rather humanistic view. So, I should explain what I'm getting at. The traditional vision of the creation of man is going to be one where God acts as sculptor, taking clay from the land, from the earth, and shaping it into a human. And what he's doing is he's shaping the form. Here, this is different. This is God giving rational thought, not God giving life. And this is a very humanist view. So in their view, Adam already exists, but the thing is, Adam is pretty much like any other animal, incapable of that one thing that sets humans aside, incapable of rational thought. So by putting Adam here as a lump on the landscape, he gets across the idea that Adam is alive, but not human. And as the hands reach out, the hand of God to give Michelangelo's Adam the spark of rational thought, that is the miracle of creation. That is the humanist miracle of creation. It's not about the physical creation of the form, but rather the spark that allows man to use logic and arguments to look into the future, to simulate what may or may not happen, to do all of those things that set us apart from the animals, at least in this 16th century worldview. So here, Adam is heavy, a piece of earth, until the touch of God gives him freedom. Beneath God's arm, what we will see is Eve over here. Now that is foreshadowing. She hasn't been created yet. She's curious. She's looking over towards Adam to see what's going on, but she hasn't been created. We know that it's not Mary because Mary would never be depicted topless, whereas Adam and Eve are traditionally depicted nude. That's acceptable. That's part of the narrative. It's who they are. His left hand points down to the Christ child. And the shell is really acting here overall as a foreshadowing device, because by creating Adam, he must create Eve. By creating Eve, we must have original sin, and with original sin, Christ must be born to die on the cross. So it's all foreshadowing. It's basically Michelangelo getting across a number of religious tenets in a single image. Now, of course, famously, we have the sense of tension that comes from these hands. In reality, 60 feet above you, these fingers are a mere half inch or so apart. And that's what gives us that incredible sense of tension. If they were to touch, then we would lose all of that. It draws us in. We want to see those fingers touch, or we want to see a spark shoot across, or any number of other things. Now, interestingly, there's another theory, and this has been gaining steam over the last, say, about 10, 15 years or so. The idea that what you're looking at is a brain, that shell with God and Eve and the Christ child is a brain. Now, you're saying to yourself, why would he do that? Well, think about it. In this humanist worldview, what sets us apart is rational thought, which exists within the brain. Michelangelo would have been aware of what the brain looks like because he, like Leonardo, is doing these illegal dissections. And is it really that far of a leap to think that one night he opens the skull, pulls out the brain, and cuts it in half at the hemisphere, something that we've all done on a sheep's brain or pig's brain or whatever else in high school? And he's taken that knowledge and used it in the composition, hiding it in plain view. And think about it this way. You're saying to yourself, but why would he do that in the Sistine Chapel? Someone's going to catch him. No one's going to catch him. Why? Because if I'm a cardinal and I'm going, hey, that looks an awful lot like a brain, the first question is, hey, go get Michelangelo. He's in a lot of trouble. But the second question is, hey, by the way, how do you know what a brain looks like? No one's supposed to be looking at it at this point. So he can take this humanist view that God is giving rational thought or free will to man, and he can depict it not only through this image of Adam fully created, getting the spark of rational thought, but he can do it by putting a brain on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. Now, one other thing we have to deal with here with the Sistine Chapel ceiling. This Sistine Chapel was heavily restored in the late 90s. And here we see above what the painting looked like and below what it looks like today. Many argued at the time that it was too bright. This was far brighter than anything Michelangelo would have created. Let me remind you that the Sistine Chapel, until very, very recently, was lit by, well, candles and torches, things that put off soot. These paintings were covered in layer upon layer of wax to quote-unquote protect them. All they're doing is sealing in the dirt that's there, the soot and everything else. So when they clean all of that off, you get a better sense of what Michelangelo's doing. One other thing to point out. Each of these figures, Adam, God, many of the figures around God, each of those figures is being done in roughly one day's work. Think about how fast and accurate Michelangelo has to be to do that. After all, this is a fresco. He has 3 to 6 hours to paint whatever he's going to paint that day and then scrape away all the rest of the plaster before it dries so that he can then lay new plaster for the next section the next day. So he's doing a figure a day. This is incredible the more you think of it. And finally, he is not doing this on his own. He is not some old guy sitting there on his back painting above him. He has assistants. He has people working for him. He has an entire workshop with him. He's not grinding his own paints. He's not running his paints up to him. He's not preparing his own plaster, etc. There are other people involved. So don't ever think that any of these artists, much less Michelangelo, are sitting there doing this all on their own.